Welcome to the February 22nd meeting of the Transportation Planning Environment Committee. We only have two things on our agenda this morning, but both are pretty action-packed, so we're going to dive right into it. The two items are an update on the Charlotte 2040 Comprehensive Plan, and then an update on the Unified Development Ordinance, which, as we get closer to the time where Council will be looking to approve these, it's more and more important that all of our council members have the opportunity to really have a thorough understanding of this. So with that, I'm going to first ask for introductions. I'm Julie Eisel, Committee Chair and Mayor Pro Tem, and who's online? What committee members?
Larkin Eggleston, Committee Vice Chair.
Ed Driggs, Committee Member. Good morning, Matt Newton, Committee Member.
And we don't have Mr. Winston yet, but we'll introduce him if he jumps in. How about staff? We have staff from the room.
Alicia Osborne, Planning Department.
Taiwo Jaoba, Planning, Manager's Office.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Any other staff online? I see Laura.
Laura Harmon, Planning Staff.
Anyone else? Yeah. Is that Liz?
Yes, ma'am. Liz Babson, Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Allison Craig, Deputy Planning Director.
That was Allison Craig. We couldn't hear you very well, though, Allison. Who else do we have?
Alan Goodwin, Planning Department.
We can't hear you guys.
Alan Goodwin, Planning Department.
Great. Anyone else?
Jay Rankins with MIG.
Hi, Jay.
This is Matt Prosser with Economic and Planning Systems.
Okay, great. That's all I see. Shout out if there's anyone else.
Good morning. Hi, Chris Jeanette with Camiros.
Oh, sorry, Chris.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jaioba and Ms. Osborne for an update on the comp plan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. So we'll start the presentation. Today we'll have two presentations to you. But before we go forward, I just wanted to pause a moment and acknowledge our friend, Darrell Gaston. So as we know, Darrell passed away this weekend, but he got involved in this process of a comprehensive plan very early on. He reached out to me and said, how can I be part of this? And he attended, I think, all the meetings. It did not matter where the meetings were, along with Melissa. And the last time he and I we had in-person meeting with the ambassadors and advisors, he and I and Melissa actually sat down together at the same table discussing place types. And I remember very well what he said to me, which is that this plan is not a one-issue plan. It's not a single-issue plan, but the fact that it touches everything, and that we need to continue to push the notion of equity. But I always remember that very well. And so I wanted to say thank you, Darrell, for helping us to push on this comprehensive plan, but also to send positive thoughts towards Melissa as well. I know that Alicia was their neighbor, so I'll turn it over to Alicia, and then she will go through the presentation. Then I will come at the end and really address a couple of things that we're going to be doing with regards to further engagement. Thank you, Alicia.
Thanks, Taiwo, for that. And I also wanted to just really thank the Gaston family for always supporting our work and supporting our neighborhoods. Darrell was the founder of the North End Community Coalition, which has been a really driving force of what the things that we see in North End, the the North End Smart District, also the neighborhood work in Druid Hills, Lockwood, Park at Oaklawn, Genesis Park. It's just really a force to be reckoned with, and was really a resounding voice and always encouraging in this planning process. As part of our ambassadors and strategic advisors, which is, the group of volunteers that have really been our sounding board for this process. He never missed a meeting. He never missed a meeting, virtual or in person. He or Melissa were always there. And a lot of our community meeting members have been as dedicated to this process as well. And so despite COVID, next slide, please, our community members continue to show up. I know it's hard and we haven't been able to meet in person, but they've done the best they can in making sure they attend the virtual meetings, participating in the gameplay, the drive-in community workshop where we released the draft document. We had over 500 people to participate. And even after that meeting, we issued about 1,200 of the planned documents at the meeting and during the next Tuesday at the election poll. So a lot of our work has been focused in this fourth phase of the project in getting the word out, making sure that folks are participating and having their voice heard throughout this process. Next slide, please. As again, we released the plan document in October of last year. And I want to just kind of highlight that that's between October and April intended adoption. A 6-month review process is what we're looking at, which is longest we've had for any policy initiative that we've worked on in the city. And because of the comprehensive plan, it's such a large overarching document. We haven't had one in such a long time. We felt that the community need time to digest the information and be available, staff be available to answer any questions that they may have or to meet with them to share more information. So where we are today is receiving those public comments between now and April. A public hearing is scheduled for March, and then adoption, a recommendation from this body and the Planning Commission in early April, and then in April 26th, adoption is this proposed schedule for the plan process. Next slide, please. You guys have seen this slide. There's a number of ways that folks are able to comment on the document. They can go online and actually comment on the actual document, email us, or send us a phone call, or call us and share their comments on the plan. And I'll share the breakdown of those comments in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So to date, we have received over 259 comments. Most of them have been by email. The online comments are what folks are actually putting into those documents. You can see the breakdown here of who we are hearing the comments from. Our elected appointed officials are participating, sharing their thoughts, having individual one-on-ones with them to make sure their questions are being answered, and that they have proper information to share to their constituents. Staff's commenting as well, sharing, making sure that what's in the comp plan is aligning with their strategic work. Again, this plan is overarching, but it connects to the strategic initiatives across the organization to make sure we achieve the city's vision. And the community is providing most of the comments on the plan. They're really providing, calling us and emailing us and having those conversations about their concerns or just questions in general. Next slide, please. Again, here's the breakdown of who's commenting. Next slide. The types of comments we're receiving, everything from there's an S missing off this word to very specific comments about sections in the plan. And I'll share the breakdown of those and highlights about what some of those comments are. Next slide, please. So the comments, the way we're receiving them to break them down into sections of the plan. So one, we can understand where we might address some of those comments in terms of proposed revisions, and then so we can better respond to the constituents or our residents and having those conversations. So the two areas with the most comments, our policy framework is really about where our 10 plan goals are, and the community-based vision is just a broader vision for how we grow, the equitable growth framework, and then the complete communities and places. That's the section that has place types and talks about the land use tool in achieving the vision. And then there's a lot of questions about implementation. How will this get done? And I'll walk through those a little bit later. Next slide. So the next couple of slides definitely have more words than I prefer on a slide, but I wanted to give a little bit of a summary of what we're hearing based on each section of the plan. So we've heard a lot about two main things on this particular section around equitable growth. How will the plan address equity, particularly in terms of transportation and just in land use and growth in general? And then the other largest are comments, or section of comments around displacement and vulnerability. How are we addressing that? Specifically around, as we grow and continue to grow as a community, how does this plan address that, those vulnerabilities? And what the plan does is establish metrics for measuring where of our vulnerable populations, and we're working with other city departments to make sure that we're speaking the same language in terms of those metrics, and that they are integrated into our everyday work and decision-making around investments and growth and development strategies. Next slide. Next slide, please. In terms of the policy framework, what we're hearing most about is more public spaces, even some recommendations around creating a public space master plan. Folks are really trying to push us beyond those 10 plan goals that we have in the plan. And then there's some questions about how will we pay for this plan? And so we've presented to this group and have been presenting to various members of the community some of the work around the fiscal impact analysis, which really is just a snapshot in time about, if we grow in this way, here are some of the ways or tools we might be able to address that growth in terms of our financing tools. Next slide. The policy framework, many of those comments are around neighborhood preservation. There were some questions around and some conversations around the 10-minute neighborhood. How does that work and how will we achieve that? How does this plan support existing businesses? So we're making those connections with the smaller organizations to talk about existing businesses. But really what a lot of the conversation has been around is one of our plan goals around removing barriers to providing housing diversity. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I did want to mention it here. Next slide. Another big question is around how will this plan work, particularly the plan versus the UDO. How do the two work together? And then the other questions are around the community planning approach. So we've been having those conversations and putting together some graphics and simplifying some messaging around how place types will work and how we will move forward with our community planning approach. Because we do know that the community planning, area planning, is very important to our community. That's where our neighborhoods are really engaged and involved in establishing the vision moving forward. So this plan doesn't remove that process. It actually provides a more streamlined and equitable and transparent way of producing those plans in the future. Next slide. So here are the 10 plan goals, and as I mentioned, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the neighborhood diversity and inclusion goal, what's actually in the plan, and then talk a little bit, walk us through what's in the plan and why this goal is so important. But it's also important to note that the comprehensive plan is not just about housing. Our neighborhoods are extremely important to the fabric of our city, but it's about connecting those neighborhoods to goods and services and amenities, to housing opportunities, to employment opportunities, and to improving our business and economic vitality as well. So these are the plan goals that I wanted to remind us of. And as we walk through these next couple of slides, focusing on the neighborhood to the second goal around neighborhood diversity and inclusion. Next slide. So what's actually in the plan? So the plan strives to, this particular goal is around increasing or removing barriers to housing diversity. And it specifically talks about increasing or providing more opportunity for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and quads in our single-family neighborhoods. And I'll show a little bit on the next slide what that looks like. So the pictures that you see on the right are existing duplexes or quads in our inner ring neighborhoods today. So that's what we're hearing from our residents around neighborhood diversity and inclusion, that there's maybe some uncertainty or not some clarity around what is to actually happen. But the plan removes the barrier, doesn't take away single-family zoning, but allows for more diversity in our neighborhoods. Next slide. So here's what's in the plan today in terms of the actual policy language. And I'll read the first 2 points to make sure that the message gets really clear. Allow duplex and triplex housing units on lots where single-family housing is allowed, but require conformance with residential lot size requirements and setbacks. That will be provided within the UDO. The point of that is saying that these will be allowed, but there will also be development requirements. So it won't be just carte blanche, you just build anywhere, but there will be development requirements. The fourplexes will be allowed on fronting arterials where single-family detached housings are permitted. When city priorities are advanced and community benefits are provided, such as affordable workforce housing. So the point of that is to allow more diversity within these neighborhoods, but to also provide how they fit into the existing character in those neighborhoods through our development requirements within the UDO. Next slide. Why is this important? One, to offer diversity in our neighborhoods, improve inequities across the community. I'll show a map in a minute that shows kind of where those houses or these types of housing are located today. And as we grow as a community, we know diverse communities they create vibrancy in our neighborhoods, accessibility to the things that our residents need. And so this plan looks to establish that. Next slide. So a little bit hard to see, but I hope you can look on your hard copies and see the maps that show where these units are today. And you see the concentration within roughly Route 4. And that's duplexes, triplexes, and quads throughout the area. And then the next map shows how the homes were built, these plex homes built since 2000, and then even less since 2010. This is what we heard from our stakeholders, that we need that middle housing, that missing middle. That's what we have in our community. We're missing that middle density housing, that variety of housing options in our community. And that's what the plan responds to, the overwhelming concern and demand from our residents to have housing options and diversity in our neighborhoods. Next slide. How will it work? Again, mentioning that there will be development standards within the Unified Development Ordinance that says how these units will perform within our existing neighborhoods. Next slide. So in response to what we've heard from our community, we will continue to have listening sessions and listen to our community. We've had 6 of those so far in the last, I think, beginning of the year, and we've received over 118 comments, 184 comments from those residents during those individual listening sessions. And the purpose of those is to provide a safe environment for people to say what they want to say, and as opposed to being on a larger platform. The other end of that is the community conversation speaker series that we've been hosting. Since January, we brought in Kimberly Driggins from Washington, D.C., who shared her experience in creating the Washington, D.C. Comprehensive Plan and really shared lessons learned, and here's what you guys need to do to keep the plan alive. Again, we always talk about this document being a living document. And that's what we hope to do with this comprehensive plan. Make sure that there are things that we can do day one of the plan being adopted and also out to the next 20 years as the plan grows and evolves with our community. Our next speaker was Paul Magoosh, also from another lesson learned, or he's right in the trenches of implementation for the Minneapolis comp plan. No stranger to Charlotte. He came to Charlotte to talk to us about place types when we first started, prior to the plan, and he shared a lot of his learnings and some ideas for us as we move forward. Our next speaker will be Charles Hales from Portland, Oregon. He's a former mayor. He was also the mayor when they started constructing their streetcar in the community. So he has that diverse background of being a planner, also an elected official. So we look forward to having him on March 9th at 11:30. Also, we wanted to make sure that we continue to tell the story of the comp plan and equipped our residents, our ambassador group, our elected officials with information with ready-made messaging. So we created an ambassador toolkit that's now available on our website. It has pre-made emails, social media posts, newsletters, graphics, images. There's an FAQ, and there is a messaging specifically to respond to those questions about the single-family zoning and recommendations within the plan. So please visit our website. The information is pretty accessible, very succinct, and equips everyone with the messaging that we need to share about the plan. Next slide. Also, we're creating, to continue telling the story, simplifying the messages and graphics. We're creating animated videos. Our UDO team actually started that in our department. They had a really cool video explaining what the UDO is and how it will work. So we're building off that concept to create one for the comp plan to talk about how the two work together. So we'll have that in next week actually to share with the community. Hopefully we can do a big push over our media outlets to make sure that it's another way of sharing what's in the plan and how others can get involved. We're also working with corporate communications on our social media campaign. There's a letter of support also within the Ambassador Toolkit. There are an overwhelming amount of people who are supportive of the plan. And we wanted to make sure that they have some messaging or something ready-made for them to show their support and to send to the elected officials or to their neighbors or to their partners that this plan is actually something that the community's worked on for over two years, and that a lot of what they have asked for is within this document. And we're continue to meet with people. I had a meeting this morning with Dilworth, president, and over the land use committee, just to talk about what's in the plan and how we're going to do area planning. So we're open to those conversations, and we're having those, and we'll continue to. Next slide. Our virtual open house, we launched that on the 16th. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for the idea. So we actually opened that, and it's a really cool way, an interactive experience for ages 8 to 80 to review information within the plan at their leisure, to look at graphics, videos, take a few surveys, and it'll be available until the plan's adopted. Comments on the plan will be received 30 days after we go to public hearing. So essentially around April 1st or mid-April is when we'll continue to receive comments. But please take advantage and share the link and share the information. It's available 24/7 and available in multiple languages, I think over 100 languages. So it's available to a lot of people. Next slide. I talked about our next speaker, Charles Hales, 11:30 on March 9th. Next slide. We'll continue to offer this as an option to reach out to our community as well. There have been enormous amount of energy around this game. And we want to encourage and urge you all to continue to participate virtually. If you want a hard copy, you can send us an email, and we'll provide that as well. Next slide. And here's what happens after plan adoption. We'll begin place type mapping over the summer and wrap that up this fall. And then shortly thereafter, our UDO team will begin their process around adoption and mapping as well. And I'll turn it over to Laura Harmon, who's going to talk about the UDO. But in the meantime, I'll take questions before then.
So maybe before the questions, I'm trying to be proactive. You may have a question around this. I wanted to add on to what Alicia has just shared. So we talked about the listening sessions, and those will be ongoing. And we also have the community conversation, one more, on March 9. In the meantime, we're also working on a citywide town hall that we will set up. When I present this to council on March 1st, I will hopefully have a date certain at that time that I can share with you all and the community with regards to when that citywide town hall will be. March 22nd is the public hearing. We would like to have it before March 22nd. On April 26th is the document adoption, allowing people to have at least a period of 30 days or so will allow us to also be able to match some of those new comments with existing comments, so we can eliminate redundancies, but also there could be newer comments that will come in that we would like to respond to. But we will have a date for you on March 1st with regards to that. There was a comment with regards to mobility, and I've been asked a question that if the transformational mobility network doesn't go and doesn't plan, we don't have an investment in transportation and public transit as we envision, does that nullify the relevance of the plan? I think the quick answer is no. There are certain things in this plan that definitely are doable with a robust transportation network. The 10-minute neighborhood, for example, would depend on access to transit, good sidewalks, complete sidewalks, especially complete streets. But not having a successful referendum does not mean we will not continue to invest in public transit and transportation as we've been doing as a community for many years. And so we'll continue to do that. It will just have to be incremental. But there are also aspects of this plan that do not depend on that at all. We talked about the 10 plan goals. There are aspects of this plan that can really go along and continue to be relevant for the foreseeable future. One thing that I like to constantly remind all of us is that this is a 20-year plan. It's not a plan that we envision will all happen in 5 years, but we're building towards it from today, marching forward towards a 20-year goal. And 6-7 years, we will revise it just to make sure that we're catching up with trends and all of that. But it's not a plan that's expected to all be adopted in 5 years, or rather to be implemented in 5 years, but it's a 20-year goal. And so there will be opportunities to change things, to respond to what happens in our community over the next many years as part of the plan. So I'll stop there, and then if you have questions, I will take them. Thank you.
Excuse me. I will start with Mr. Newton and then Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has certainly been a lot of work over the past 2 years, and I want to thank the planning department for all the work they have put in, and thank you for the presentation, by the way. I am encouraged to hear that there are going to continue to be community meetings. I know I've had a lot of difficulty personally wrapping my head around the place type concept, and I've had some difficulty explaining that to my district and my constituents. And I just hope that we continue to discuss that and clarify exactly what place types are, particularly as they relate to zoning designations, our current and future zoning designations. So I would ask that we place some emphasis on that, because I still feel like place types are confusing, not just for us as, me as a council member, but for the community that hasn't sat in on our committee meetings or even been up to speed on on the other updates we received elsewhere in our city council meetings, our retreat, etc. I wanted to ask about the housing diversity, the neighborhood diversity that we just heard about.
And Mr. Newton, are you able to speak a little more directly to the microphone?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
Did everyone catch everything I just mentioned about place types? Yes, I'm seeing head nods. Yes? Okay, so I wanted to ask about housing diversity, neighborhood diversity. That certainly makes a lot of sense when we're talking about areas where infrastructure and transportation exist in abundance. I hear that, and I just want to be clear. We're talking about really creating a framework for higher residential density, right? Now, possibly higher residential density in areas where there's single family zoning, but then on the flip side, and I don't think we're hearing this as much, but on the flip side, lower density in higher zoned areas. Is that the case?
Yes, so it's not, to your point, it's not just in single-family areas, but also in areas that have the infrastructure to support it. There are other place types that support that goal around housing diversity. We have a community activity centers that might be can easily be understood by our transit-oriented development. There are neighborhood centers as well that have housing options in them and neighborhood nodes. So there are other ways that we're looking at providing more housing diversity. I just wanted to respond to that particular issue that you guys have been getting emails and letters and everything about that particular one. But we're looking across the community in different areas where infrastructure can support it to have more housing diversity.
Yeah, I guess that's it, because there are areas in my district, and I'm assuming this is the case around town, particularly the further away we get from our city center, where there has been an uptick in frankly unchecked growth and development. The land is cheap, developers are coming in, and they're upzoning in what they build. So they're building higher densities than were ever first anticipated in either current zoning or even plans from 20, 30 years ago. And that's created a number of problems in those areas. I've spoken a lot about east of Harris Boulevard in the far east area. There's an organization that actually just formed over this past year to address that. It's called FinCo. And so I've had a number of meetings with them, and there simply isn't today the infrastructure or transportation options in place to really accommodate that growth. And so my question is if we're talking about a housing diversity and neighborhood diversity, is that across the board? And are we talking about the possibility of place types that include higher densities in these areas where we know that current infrastructure and transportation, unfortunately, isn't keeping up with that growth today? And where we really, let me also say, where we can't really pinpoint where we're going to be 5 years from now, because that growth is already underway, and there's so many developments that have yet to be fully completed, built. And so the full impact is yet to be real. But are we talking about, those duplexes, triplexes, or even higher densities in these areas that are facing these challenges today and will certainly be facing them over the next 5 years?
To address that?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. I think if I'm understanding what Councilmember Newton is saying with regards to housing diversity and infrastructure that matches that, that's why I think a few slides back we said the answer is yes. We would like to see housing diversity throughout the entire city, because one of the reasons we have issues with lack of affordable housing today is because of the lack of housing diversity in communities. But understanding also the challenge with infrastructure is why we also indicated that quad quadplexes, for example, will be preferred along arterials and close enough to areas where you have transit service provisions, the Blue Line, the Gold Line, more frequent bus lines, bus services, and arterials where people can actually get on the road and get to where they need to go. That's why we made reference to that. But things like duplexes, triplexes, townhomes are happening today, but just not fast enough as to where they can get to, which obviously means that if we're going to address the issue of affordable housing, this is one of the tools that will help us to get there. But I will also quickly say that it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to respond to market forces, obviously, but it's also going to happen in an incremental fashion. So understanding that we have challenge with infrastructure, we have ongoing every 2-year cycle, the transportation bond, that will continue. And as we match, if this is eventually adopted by council, it definitely means we have to take a good look at that transportation bond every 2 years and see areas of greatest need and where we can continue to match infrastructure with the type of growth that different communities are having. But this isn't going to happen like overnight because council has adopted it. There are other forces that will help to put those in place over the next 2 decades.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Councilmember Newton, what will happen with the place type mapping process, we will have the conversations and do the analysis that you're talking about in terms of where are we envisioning housing diversity or understanding where our highest areas of need or growth will happen, and then map the place types with the community and have those considerations in mind. Where are investments today? Where are they envisioned to go? And how do we equitably distribute that growth based on what we know in terms of our investments? If that makes sense. So the plan adopts the place type palette in principle in April, but then the mapping process starts in May, where we have that more in-depth, on-the-ground conversation with our community about here's the places we're trying to create, how do we equitably grow in the future in creating those places, and what types of investments should we be making or decisions that need to be made to accommodate that growth.
Is that it for you, Mr. Newton, with your questions? Are you good?
Follow-up, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, my speaker was on mute there. One quick follow-up. I hear you. My concern is in areas where isn't the infrastructure or transportation options. Once again, in the Far East, in my district, I'm sure that there are other districts. The growth is overnight right now under our current policies, our current zoning. And I think the concern is if you upzone that and allow higher density, you're just going to expedite that growth and compound the challenges faced by the community there. I want us to pay more attention to that infrastructure, that transportation, put it in place, but that costs money, right? And we know that takes time. Development can occur so much quicker in that interim time. And so I think that we can continue to have this conversation, certainly have the conversation with the community and get all this worked out, because it's something that is a very large concern of mine moving forward here with this, the comprehensive plan and even the UDO. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Newton. And that's really a gigantic question, because it's a chicken and the egg that you can't get that infrastructure, you can't get those grocery stores unless you have the density. But as we all know way too well, that's a lot of that is out of our control. If it's a state road, it's NCDOT. We can't control how, as Ms. Watlington in Steel Creek knows, we can't control how quickly they widen a road, they add roads, they add infrastructure. So that is a tough question. So thank you, Mr. Newton. Mr. Eggleston is next, followed by Mr. Driggs.
Mr. Genova covered a good bit of what I was going to say. And I talked on those topics just under an hour ago, so I appreciate him preemptively bringing it up. But I do think that it's disappointing to see how few duplexes, triplexes, and quads have been built in the last 2 decades because I think we've lost a lot of ground in that regard. And I live in one of the neighborhoods, and you saw that map that demonstrated where the concentration of these are. And I live, it's my district that has probably 50% of them on that map. And I live in Plaza Midwood, where you see those sorts of orientations all the time. And they very much present like single family homes. And you see them in some of the most affluent neighborhoods in our community too, like Myers Park. And I don't think people even realize oftentimes, unless they've known someone who lived in the building, that something they pass might have multiple units inside of it, because it, again, very much appears to be a single family home. So I think we have got to do, and I know that staff is mindful of this, and I appreciate that some of these town halls that are going to come up, and all the efforts that are going behind helping people understand what this would mean. Because my sense from some of the feedback we're getting initially is that when people hear something like the elimination of single family zoning, that we're going to take some of these single family neighborhoods and drop, light rail adjacent apartment complexes in the middle of them or something. And clearly that's not the intent, and that's not what's going to happen. But I think for a lot of folks, they don't necessarily have much sense of what the middle ground is between those two extremes. And so and I think pictures here will be worth 1,000 words. I think using pictures of these sorts of structures that exist in neighborhoods like Dilworth, Myers Park, Eastover, Plaza Midwood, Noda, and saying this is what we're talking about. We're talking about something that as you drive down the street does not change the character of that street in a way that a large apartment complex or condo complex might. Because there is a lot of anxiety right now as it relates to the impact it'll have on the character of neighborhoods, property values. And I think it is and will be our job to bring good information to the conversation and make sure that people understand what's happening here, because if they believed that we were going to be allowing, very, very dense apartment complexes in the midst of these single family communities, as opposed to on the edges or along transit lines or the places where we do encourage that sort of development, I can't blame them for being anxious. And we've got to make sure we as council members, but the city as a whole, are equipped to have that conversation in a complete way. I was also the one who had brought up to Taiwo, and I don't think at all that I believe the outcome of our transit efforts could potentially render the comp plan or the UDO irrelevant or anything to that effect. But I do think that the way that we envision our city growing and the way that it will grow is very much going to be predicated on the passage or lack thereof of this transit effort. And so I do think we've got to have, at minimum, we've got to have a contingency plan for what would change in these plans if the transit package does not pass. And I think we also need to be mindful now that looks like it'll be a 2022 vote, not a 2021 vote. So I don't know that I'd go so far as to say that we should delay adoption of these things until we have certainty in that regard. But I do think that we've got to have sort of a plan A and a plan B. What would change in these plans, comp plan and UDO, based on the passage or lack thereof of the transit referendum? So I do hope we're mindful of that, because if we pass something that envisions transit being passed and funded in a big way, and all of these projects, going towards construction and delivery around the same timeline, and then that doesn't happen, I don't think the plan reflects the reality of where we'll be headed. So anyway, appreciate all the efforts there. And I think on both fronts, communication with the community and visuals are going to be key. And so I encourage us to have as many of those conversations, particularly around the single family zoning misunderstandings that I think are out there, as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been pretty vocal, I think, throughout this process about concerns that I have, and I will just briefly reiterate that throughout this process, Council has basically been told what's going on. We've been asked if we have questions. There hasn't really been a robust policy debate leading to the creation of this plan. We have been reacting to it the whole time. And I don't think you can point to anything in the plan that's identifiable as being the input from a member of council. And it just concerns me because I think that what we're hearing about the response from the community is not reflective of the broader community and of all the stakeholders that we're going to need to kind of win over and get on board. So if you go out in the street and you ask somebody what they think of the 2040 plan, there's a 99% chance they have no idea what you're talking about. And a lot of people who will be very concerned about it aren't aware yet. I think the single family issue, for example, certainly in my district is a big one. And I'm not sure, I appreciate Mr. Eggleston's acknowledgement of those concerns, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that all of those concerns aren't well founded. A lot of people who live in single family neighborhoods right now enjoy the environment they're in. Many of them are mixed race. There are certainly a lot of African Americans who live in my environment here. But this is a lifestyle that a lot of people appreciate. And they don't appreciate it because they're intent on inflicting harm on some group in society. It's just something that's actually sort of consistent with the traditional American dream of getting married, having kids, buying a house with a mortgage, etc. And so that feature alone, I think, as it becomes more broadly known, is going to give rise to concerns among a large number of people. And I will note also that as we go through this input that we've received, the comments that we're getting are either in accordance, in alignment with the plan, or if they aren't, they're treated as questions. I don't see any evidence that action is being taken as a result of any concerns that might be raised. They're just sort of dealt with in terms of explanations, and then we carry on. We've got to recognize at some point that this plan has got to be more reflective of a bigger cross-section of the community and sensitive to the attitudes of some people. Personally, I think that trying to impose a vision for the city on the city, regardless of market forces, individual preferences, and things that might be at odds with these rules that we're talking about putting in place, is an instance of government overreach. And I don't think that government can cure all the problems of society as this plan appears to want to do. And I would particularly draw to everybody's attention the fact that the plan includes, among other things, the reduction of obesity. Now, what kind of a feature is that for a land use plan? We started down this road recognizing that we needed to modernize and integrate our policies on land use, the zoning ordinance, the area plans, and so on. And I think it has gotten bloated. I think we've gone out and we've now tried to put together a laundry list of things that are desirable, all of them without question, but many of which are at odds with each other. And I don't think we've reconciled the inherent conflicts in our aspiration about trees and things like that. Our goal to continue to be a vibrant, growing society where we create jobs. If we create an environment that is too coercive for the purposes of development, it's going to have an effect on our ability to attract businesses and create jobs. And the only way you create jobs is by attracting business and getting businesses who are employers to locate here. There is no government jobs program that does anything nearly as effective as just having an environment in which businesses want to locate and hire people. So I have some very basic concerns. I think we have more work to do on this. I think we need to hear more from particularly the business community, which I don't feel is reflected very well in everything that we've been told about the feedback we're getting. And therefore, I think we have a ways to go. There's no question in my mind that we need a plan and that we should be ambitious. But as I read this, I just think it is unrealistic, I guess is the best way to put it. I think we need to get it back in touch with all the people who will be affected by it and recognize that the reconciliation of conflicting priorities is going to have to be a part of this. And so far, I don't see it in here. So I've said it before. I just want to be on record as saying it again. I don't think we're done yet, and I don't think we have the benefit of the kind of input from the community that we ought to have in order for this to be a realistic and genuinely inclusive plan. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Can I make a comment, and then if you want to? So I have a question, and going back to Mr. Eggleston's point, there are, and I'll take the pictures and bring them in. I can think of duplexes in Myers Park on Queens Road West that go for over $1 million. And that's a function of the land value. So I think there's a lot of concern and fear, and maybe that's because we haven't explained it and literally shown graphics on it and asked enough questions. But the land value of an area is going to dictate, to a great extent, what product is put up there. But allowing duplexes and triplexes, they're already there in some of the neighborhoods who I know have done GoFundMe pages to fight this. And, you know, one question I have, and I think maybe I know part of the answer, is that presently you can build a duplex on a corner in our 3 neighborhoods. And I suspect it's because you have a driveway on one street and a driveway on the other street. And so I do wonder if you're going to allow a duplex or a triplex in the middle of a block, how do you, with the R3 restrictions on parking and, you know, what's required, how do you manage that without having, you know, what do you do with those 3 driveways? Now, I lived in a condo a townhouse that it was a common wall, and it was one driveway. And so one garage was here, one was there, and so that solves that. Is there going to be restrictions on where those driveways can be, on how many driveways? You know, that's one question I have, because what I don't want to see with R3 is it all becomes impervious space taken up by driveways of a triplex. I do think that would lower the value of a neighborhood when you have your setbacks, but a lot of people like having a backyard. If it's all taken up with driveway space and then somebody puts an ADU back there, there is a design problem with that could in fact lower property values. So that's my first question, if you want to address that, and then I have another comment.
Actually, the best answer is to say that that's something that the regulation will help address more than all this plan would do is to help set the policy framework. But I do agree with you. You don't want to have a street where you have multiple driveways into, whether you have an ADU in the back or you have maybe in front townhome and then in the back duplexes. I think we have them even on Providence right now where you have a number of these, but you have one driveway that goes into them. But what if someone is building in the same thing in the next lot? They will have to maintain, I believe, their existing driveway unless they are fronting the main road. But I think that as we transition from place types into the zoning district is when you're going to see some of the regulations that will address those specifically. But yes, you are right. We're going to have to make sure that as we develop this, there will be another time where I believe CDOT will be helping us to address some of these things specifically, but we're not there yet with regards to that. Yes.
So we're getting close.
Also involves some public processes.
But currently, what's in there now, my colleagues send me a message, we're proposing a single driveway for those units as you described. And for duplexes, tris, and quad, the parking will not be allowed in the front of the building. So you won't see, some of the older duplexes and quads have that parking lot in the front. In some of the neighborhoods, in particular, I've seen some on Queens Road, but they won't allow that in the newer development. So it'll be a single drive, and then also parking won't be allowed in the front of the building.
Okay, I think, you know, the public hearing is a month from today. I don't think people are going to read the UDO to get those details before the public hearing, so I think we need some visuals of what that actually looks like in practice to Mr. Larkin's point, to Mr. Eggleston's point, let's go out and take pictures of what this product looks like, because it's there now. And I'm going to push back on the notion of that, yes, there are people of color living in upper income neighborhoods, and of course there are, but there's a lot of people who never were in a position to acquire the wealth to be able to buy a neighborhood in a neighborhood like that because of redlining and because of the history of our community that said you can't live in Myers Park. And for a long time that was true. It's not anymore, but the fact is that if you had your grandparents or parents, depending on how old you are, that weren't allowed to buy in neighborhoods that have seen an exceedingly high property value over the decades, and you're in a neighborhood that's on the other side of 277 and your property didn't gain value and you didn't pass it on to your children, or you lived in a school district that frankly isn't providing the same opportunities as schools in some of these wealthier neighborhoods, you're not set up to be able to buy a house in these neighborhoods. And that's the system that is painful to break and isn't going to make everybody happy, but that's the core of this problem and why communities across the country are saying, you're right, we've got to break this up, we've got to address this problem. It's a painful thing to do, and that's why we need more visuals as to what this looks like, but it's the reality. It's giving people opportunities to live anywhere. Not everybody will be able to. We talk about affordable housing as if it means one thing in every district, and it just doesn't. Affordable living in Myers Park could be $300,000. That could be top of the income level for a house in other districts. So it's just not this monolithic notion that affordable housing means the same everywhere. But I really have to push back on this idea that a duplex or a triplex somehow is going to bring in, and I've heard it, an element that people don't want in their neighborhoods, and it's going to ruin the whole character. We should take the questions, we should take the concerns, and we should give answers, and we should do it in a visual way, because it's just being misunderstood. And I personally think we need to have one town hall just on this issue, because it is the hottest issue of this whole comprehensive plan.
Madam Chair, could I comment?
Sure.
One, I said single family, not high income. There are plenty of single family neighborhoods that are middle class. And in fact, a lot of the new product today that's being created at market prices is markedly more expensive than the price of a modest single family home today. As we've seen in our rezonings, the price points for a lot of the conversions that are in fact happening now from R3 or lower density residential categories to UR2, the units that are being created there are being offered at $500,000 to $800,000 in many locations around Charlotte. So I don't want this to become some sort of social class warfare thing. I'm talking about a style of neighborhood that is traditional, that was appreciated by many Americans in places too where there weren't the exclusions that you talk about in Charlotte. And I think that's what some people are going to want to try to defend. And I don't think those people should be treated as if they're anxious to perpetuate some of the unfairness of the past towards minority groups and so on. So, we need to be balanced about this conversation, and we need to recognize that some of the concerns that people have are perfectly legitimate and have just as much place in our conversation as the issues that are featured most prominently in this plan.
And Mr. Driggs, I'll clarify, my comments were not directed at what you just said. My comments are directed at the majority of the emails that I'm getting in the comments on Nextdoor and the GoFundMe pages that have already said they're raising money to hire lawyers. Those are coming from neighborhoods that are high income. And you're right, perception is reality to anybody. And so we have a duty to better educate people as to what this means and what we intend to do. And I don't know that we should expect that everybody's gonna like it, but it needs to be fair and everybody needs to be heard and everybody needs to have the opportunity to be educated as to what this actually means and what it looks like, and that's our responsibility. And I think we need to do it before this public hearing on March 22nd.
I agree with that. I would just point out that what you're talking about, the emails you're getting and the lawyers, that is the beginning of the manifestation of what I've been expecting the whole time. I've seen us kind of sidestep those groups and proceed with their relative unawareness, and now they're waking up and they're starting to recognize what this means for me, kind of thing. And I think you'll see this from the commercial community too. We could have been much more inclusive in the past in terms of outreach to people like this who are going to be affected. We could have acknowledged the fact that there are inherent conflicts. As you point out, for example, we try to increase density, and that increases impervious, and then we have a stormwater question. Or our tree policy, does that align? The 10-minute neighborhoods, how consistent is that with existing neighborhoods? There are a lot of questions that we should be asking openly, and that the conversations about which should be including more people than the type of person who has participated in a lot of these events and said, yeah, I love it. I just don't think that I think we've come too far without having had the benefit of a legitimate citywide discussion. And now we're having to kind of take on board the people that have been left out so far and try to patch this thing up in order to be more responsive to their concerns. I think Raleigh, for example, did a better job of this 10 years ago, and the results were very impressive there. We've seen what happened in Raleigh. So I just hope we can. I think we need more time, and I think we're now getting to the point that maybe we should have been a while ago, where we can recognize and include people who have not been participating in this conversation so far. I mean, we don't need them to be hiring lawyers. We need them to feel like they're participating, and that the things they say are actually causing some adjustments to be made. And the way this has gone so far, I just don't see adjustments being made based on anything that somebody says that isn't in line with the plan as it was originally written. And that's just, I think we're on track for a rather loud community conversation.
Yes, I do agree with that. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. I'd like to kind of address the civic engagement aspect, because I think that that's what one of the things that Councilmember Driggs brought up. I believe if you were to ask me today, we have done everything we can to reach out to the entire city, including the extraterritorial jurisdictions as well. I have not, and in all my almost 30 years as been in planning, this is probably the best public engagement that I have seen associated with the comprehensive planning process. It has been equitable. I have spoken to residents, I've spoken to businesses, I've been to community associations. Last time I was with a community association prior to COVID-19 hitting us in person was December of 2019. That was Myers Park. I remember very well. I spent almost 2 hours that evening walking through the scenarios for growth, what density means, how we've grown as a city, and how infrastructure is important. Prior to that, I was at Valentine Breakfast, South Charlotte partners, been to maybe Rebic many times. We've presented to NAOP, which I know you're going there this afternoon. Been to the ULI. I think that not only have we gone to residents, we've also gone to the builders, understanding that you have to be balanced and equitable as you have your comments. The same opportunities that we've provided to groups on the west side or the east side, the north side, is the same we've provided to the south side. Now people have to choose whether they have the time to attend a community meeting or not. But despite the COVID, we've also provided multiple listening sessions, conversations. People have an opportunity to call in, to meet with us, to provide opportunities. Despite the digital divide, we printed hundreds of physical copies of the plan that we distributed to libraries, all the libraries in the county. And if people requested for copies, as recently as last week, I think we had someone requested for hard copy. We said we'll mail to them. So we've provided, I will say, again, like I said, in all my years of professional experience associated with developing master plans, this is probably the best or most robust in terms of engagement I have seen. Could we have missed one thing or the other? I don't doubt it. There will never be a perfect engagement, especially in the middle of coronavirus. Now, whether people are just waking up to understand what needs to happen, that's fine, but they can reach out to us. The window is still open to ask questions, and we would definitely be willing to address them. I think that's one of the reasons why when Mayor Pro Tem suggested the virtual open house idea, we jumped on it immediately. And I think that I have been on it a number of times. I've said a lot of things that are like criticism of the virtual open house to Alicia and say, hey, you guys, are you sure you're fixing this and all of that? So there are opportunities to comment, but I don't want us to think that we are swaying our engagement in favor of one group or another. But one thing I will say, though, and I will wrap this up, is that we are biased in terms of what is community priorities. Affordable housing. There cannot be one tool that solves that. There's got to be multiple tools, and this is one of those, especially in a state where we do not have inclusionary mandatory provision. We've got to look at different tools. Transportation, mobility, we have to do things that will allow us to favor that. Being fiscally responsible, I think you asked us several times when we've brought in the plans to present. We made sure that we brought in an economic planning and systems that's done the same thing all over the country and even overseas to provide input. So all of these are things that we have to be biased in favor of, that housing, transportation, financing or funding this. And so at the end of the day, there will be some groups out there who will feel that there's one or two aspects of this plan that do not go their way. We get that. And that's why it's a 20-year plan, but we will constantly come back again periodically to revise this plan to make sure that if there are things that are missed this time, we capture them. The process is still long. We're still going to have community area planning process in this, and then the UDO itself will come back as a tool. So I like to be able to correct that narrative on civic engagement. I believe that we've been out there. Maybe people did not take the time to really invest time in this. But at that point, I will not say it is staff's fault. I think that we still have room. March 22nd is the hearing, and April 26th is the adoption. There's still opportunity to comment, but I really, truly believe that we've done a robust engagement. But if there are communities out there that still feel they have not been heard, we would like to meet with them and make sure that we hear them. And then eventually, one of the things we're going to share with you, which we're not there today, is to let you see how we've been addressing those comments, because it's a draft document. What we don't want to do is to come to you and share with you how those comments are being addressed, but you can be sure that they are being addressed. And when we come to you, you will see how those comments are being addressed one by one to make sure that everyone who expressed a voice, whether supporting or opposing, will see how those comments are being addressed. That's what I just wanted to clear up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Driggs.
Yes, and Ty, your comment is very fair, and I want to be clear that it's not for a lack of availability of information or outreach, but in my mind, it's more a question of just interpreting the input that we have. I'm basing my feeling about the mood of the broader public on my knowledge of who the neighborhoods are, a lot of the people I know, who the businesses are. And in fact, I've talked to the business community and I've said, guys, speak up, involve yourselves, because you really should be more interested in this. So I don't disagree with you that there was probably some apathy on part of some of the groups I'm talking about, but I just saw them. I saw it coming. I saw them waking up at some point, looking at this thing. And so I guess in my mind, it's not a question of your effort to make yourself accessible or to stir things up to get the community involved, so much as it's a question of interpreting what information we have for the community and recognizing that it doesn't represent a full cross-section, and therefore anticipating that we're going to start to hear things like what the Mayor Pro Tem said. So I think from early on, council could have used its own knowledge of the mix of stakeholders and people in the community to recognize when we had reached a point where everybody that needed to be heard from had participated. And but I do want to acknowledge your efforts, and I don't disagree at all that our outreach and the kind of information we've made available was easily sufficient for a broader conversation.
Okay, thank you. Healthy conversation, we have to have it. I do hope that we will have more opportunities to drill down on some of these issues before the public hearing so that we can go into the public hearing more informed and giving the opportunity to give the public more education information. With that, we're going to move on to the UDO, and I know Mr. Driggs has to leave us at noon, but we will start right away with the UDO, and again, go back to Mr. Jawoba and Ms. Harmon.
Okay, thank you very much. So both of what you're hearing today, we're going to share with you again on March 1st. But I wanted Laura to, because last time we were here was in November last year, we wanted you to see where we are today. She's going to probably spend more time on process and some connection between the plan and the regulation. So, and I know we have Councilmember Driggs for only about 15 minutes or so. So Laura, I'll yield to you. And then maybe if you can speak for a few minutes, and then let's see if he has some questions with regards to the UDO that we can address before he jumps off. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Laura Harmon with the Planning Department, and I also have with me here Alan Goodwin, who's the Deputy Project Manager for the UDO, and Chris Jeanette with Camiris, our consultant working on the UDO, who's also going to be sharing part of this presentation. I know you probably have seen this slide before, something very close to it. I just want to remind you why we're doing this. This is the primary regulatory tool for implementation of the 2040 comprehensive plan. So we are following, as you'll see in a minute, with what we're doing with some zoning districts very closely along with the plan. We're also working to align development regulations so that they work better together. Sometimes our regulations, which were multiple regulations put together at different times, don't work as well together as we'd like them to. We're trying to resolve a lot of that. We think it's time to update a lot of our regulations, particularly the zoning piece of it, also looking extensively at trees and what we're doing for streets to include some of our best practices and revised development standards, which we'll be bringing forward. In a UDO, obviously bringing together all of our development regulations into a single document and having all the regulations related to a specific topic in one place. Right now, particularly with streets, you can go to multiple different ordinances and find a little bit about streets in one place, a little bit more in another. And we're trying to bring all this together and make it much more user-friendly. Speaking of user-friendly, simplify terms, create common language across all of our development regulations, increased use of graphics, and finally, there is updated North Carolina legislation 160D that we will be making sure we comply with in the UDO. Again, the connection, obviously the comprehensive plan is the vision and the foundation for many components of the UDO. And then you can see on the right, we have implementation of the comprehensive plan through regulations with all of our ordinances, and we'll be bringing zoning ordinance, subdivision, trees, chapter 19, sidewalks and streets, post-construction floodplain, erosion control, and driveway and access regulations all into a single document, a single source for regulations from the city of Charlotte for our jurisdiction and the ETJ. How you will see this when it comes out is we'll have obviously an introduction and how the UDO works, but the three major components would be the zoning component, subdivision, streets, and infrastructure, and stormwater and natural resources. And that chapter is also where trees will be located. So those will be your three substantive chapters, and we'll have the administration chapter as well. We're working with Camiris is the lead UDO consultant, and Arista Strungus is the project manager. And then we're working very closely with Chris Jeanette, who you will see today. And we also have Parker Poe on board to do legal review and make sure that we are legally sound in what we're proposing. We also have an interdepartmental team. I won't read you all the city departments, but a number of city departments, as well as a couple of county agencies that we should have on here. So apologies to them, but we have Park and Rec and Louisa also working on this. So this is a broad effort with a lot of folks within the city organization working to do this. And that city team is giving input. We have core teams working on different sections that are interdepartmental. These folks will also be participating in community engagement, supporting council adoption. So as you have technical questions about different components, the experts will be there to answer your questions. And then obviously we'll be implementing the new ordinance because many of them will administer different chapters of the UDO. We're also working with an ordinance advisory committee. We have over 30 volunteer community members, represent neighborhoods, sustainability interests, and design and development. So we have a pretty good balance of folks. They are providing us advice and feedback as we give them concepts or components of the UDO. We have had, and they have been really with us for a long time and giving us great amount of feedback. We've had 18 regular ordinance advisory committee meetings and 3 optional drop-in meetings since the adoption of the TOD districts in 2019. So they have really been engaged. Still have a lot of feedback that we'll be getting from them. Don't want to suggest that we're anywhere near the end of getting their feedback, but we just appreciate the tremendous amount of time these volunteers have put in. And we are planning 7 additional regular meetings with our ordinance advisory committee before the first public draft of the UDO, and then we will continue meeting with them as we get comments and to gather additional comments from them. What have we accomplished? The earlier phases in 2019 with the new TOD districts, the realignment, rezoning for TOD, sign regs, and tree ordinance update. We are in the midst now of developing the full UDO and are really at the drafting and ordinance advisory committee review stage. We will then move on to community engagement and adoption later this year, and then beginning next year with a number of implementation activities, which will be a lot of training and as well as alignment rezoning. And then we know that as we get in there and work with the UDO, we will probably almost definitely be needing to make some adjustments to make it work better as we learn how all the components are. So this is our schedule. Right now we're in phase 2, again, of that drafting and working with the Ordinance Advisory Committee, periodically coming to you all in our Planning Commission updates. In May is when we will be, probably late May, putting out the first public draft of the UDO available for the larger community to review, and then June through August, having opportunities, community engagement on the specific components of the UDO, and then beginning in September through October in the adoption process. After adoption, we'll have, again, training, informational sessions for council and planning commission who handle particularly the rezonings, translating districts. So we have a set of districts now that will go away. And so we'll need to translate them to the new districts, and then alignment rezonings as we did for TOD.
Hey, Laura?
Yes, sir.
It's Ed. I do have to jump off, and I apologize for interrupting.
No problem.
If I may, I just want to offer a quick comment before I leave. Originally, you recall the UDO was under development as a standalone and was characterized to us as a rationalization and consolidation of our policies. And it was more kind of operational, or it was a badly needed modernization of how we do all this stuff. And then there came a time when council didn't really understand what a place type was, and it was clear that we weren't kind of able to participate. And we felt that to write the UDO without having defined a goal for our city didn't make sense. And that's when Mr. Jaoba, I think quite sensibly, said, why don't we work on a plan? You know, let's be intentional about where we want to go and then have the UDO take us there. So I think this process is valuable. I do think that it's a little interesting that it's being done concurrently with the plan instead of after it. So it's kind of hard to appreciate that the UDO is an implementation of an adopted plan rather than something that's happening at the same time on a script that is not necessarily the same as the plan. But nonetheless, I think we should do it. There's an urgent need for it. So I'm supportive in that sense. I think we need more detail on place types before a lot of people will be able to really respond meaningfully, understand a lot more about how restrictive or prescriptive, put it that way, the place types will be. So again, I believe that there are some important conversations we still need to have before we can nail all of this down. But I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. And again, I look forward to having UDO. And I just think there's some more work to be done. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thanks, Mr. Drakes.
A little bit about implementation, and I mean, I hate that Mr. Drakes has had to step off, because one thing I want to say is that we are following the comp plan and we're following it where it is now. If things are adjusted in the comp plan, we will adjust through the UDO. So I don't want it to seem like we are stuck with where we are now. If there are changes or adjustments, want to make sure everyone is aware that we will adjust as well. And particularly even through the place type mapping that will happen this summer with the community. If anything changes with place types, that it could require changes in what we're doing in the zoning districts and otherwise. So the place type mapping, which is not being done through the UDO team directly, it's being done with the comprehensive plan team, but obviously we all work very closely together. So that'll be done this summer. We will, so that will be a baseline for how we assess rezonings in the future and how we look at zoning in general in the future. In addition, when the UDO goes into effect with new zoning districts, and we'll have a slide in a minute to show you this in a little bit more detail, we will translate. So what is currently an R3 district will become a neighborhood 1A district, for example, assuming everything stays as it is now. And then even after that, we will find that after the translation that maybe our current zoning pattern still doesn't match place types, and we need to align that. And this is the process we went through with TOD. We had TOD-M districts all convert to the new TOD district, TOD-CC. And then after that, Alan led a pretty significant process to go back and look at all of our station areas and recommended, and you all approved, a number of rezonings to bring our zoning on the ground in alignment with the adopted area plans and policy. Here is the zoning district translation example where you can see, say, R17MF translates to neighborhood 2B, which probably doesn't mean anything to you guys right now, but it will. So all of our conventional zoning will translate to a new conventional zoning district. We will not be translating our conditional rezoning, only our conventional rezoning. We'll look at the conditional rezoning through the alignment assessment, but there's no way to easily translate all of our conditional and optional. So I can stop now, or we can actually probably just keep on going. We don't have that many slides left. To give you an example of how we're moving from policy and place types to regulations. So I want to talk a little bit today about what Alicia talked about earlier, which are our residential districts. And we talked about the policy earlier, that kind of missing middle density housing, particularly the duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, and so forth. And then that policy leads into the neighborhood 1 place types, which are what are now our traditional lower density neighborhoods, and the neighborhood 2 place type, which are our townhouse and multifamily areas. And then you can see on the right a series of zoning districts, both neighborhood 1 districts and neighborhood 2 districts that relate to the place type. So again, we are building off of what's in the place type currently. Should that change in any case, then we will make adjustments accordingly. Again, and not to belabor this, because I think Alicia covered this pretty well, but there's that neighborhood 1 policy talking about duplex and triplex units on all lots, and fourplexes or quadruplexes on arterials with a community benefit. More specifically, we have the neighborhood 1 zoning districts, and I'm going to turn this over to Chris in just a minute. But to give you an example, for a property currently zoned R3, it will be comparable to an N1A district, R4, N1B, and so forth. So there is a direct relationship in most cases between old districts and new districts. And again, I feel like Alicia has covered a lot of the place type policy, but with, and actually I think this is where I turn it over to Chris. So he will talk a little bit about the zoning regulations for those, for the neighborhood 1 districts.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I won't beat the dead horse of talking about sort of the process of evaluating the policy and then kind of translating that into zoning. Sufficing to say that we're taking our direction and coming up with regulations from the current policy that's in the comprehensive plan. So just to reiterate, if that policy at some point changes, then we're ready to change our approach within the regulatory framework to respond to that. Based on the land use direction that we're taking out of the place types, again, I just wanted to provide some additional details about what we've drafted so far for the neighborhood 1 districts. So just to reiterate, in terms of the land use we're looking at, primarily single-family detached homes. Accessory dwelling units would be permitted. This is all coming out of the place types for neighborhood 1. Duplexes, tribes, quadruplexes, and civic uses, schools, religious institutions, parks would all be permitted within these place types and districts. And then in some cases, small neighborhood commercial buildings would also be permitted. So how do we take those concepts and translate them over into zoning regulations? What we've done is we've come up with this initial palette of 5 districts here, N1A through to N1E. And just some features of these districts to kind of take a broad brush and inform you of what's in here. Single family, duplex, and triplex dwellings would be allowed on any lot in any of these 5 districts. Quads would be allowed on arterial streets within these districts when an affordable unit is provided. So you can have a tri or you can have a quadruplex on an arterial as long as one of those 4 units is considered to be an affordable unit. Accessory dwelling units would be allowed in any of these districts, as well as I previously mentioned the civic and institutional uses, things like parks, churches, schools. Then we have what we're calling the neighborhood commercial establishment. We moved ahead. Neighborhood commercial establishment would really respond to that guidance about existing commercial, small commercial buildings within this place type as well. And that's a use that really kind of gathers together a series of low intensity uses that might be appropriate for existing buildings within the neighborhood one environment, things like yoga studios, art galleries, those types of things. And again, only allowed within existing buildings. So you couldn't come into an N1 neighborhood, build a new commercial building and put a commercial use in it. Next slide, please. So in addition to those first 5, we've developed the N1F district. This one is a little bit more intense and it's designed to respond to this guidance coming again out of the place types. That in N1, there would be certain areas that would allow smaller lot single family as well as small townhome and small multifamily development. So what we've done is we've crafted the N1F, and the regulations within this district say that you can develop residential dwellings on a lot of 3,500 square feet or more. And as the rezonings happen, as the place type mapping happens, it's envisioned that this district will be mapped primarily along arterial corridors within the city to really accommodate the varied forms of housing that would be permitted here, including, again, small-scale townhome and small-scale multifamily uses. Really, to get at that orientation of the small-scale component of the multifamily and townhome, what we've done to date is built in some standards that limit those uses to 2 principal buildings on a lot. If you're doing a multifamily stacked building, then you're limited to 1 principal structure on a lot. We've built in requirements for on-site open space that are particular to these dwelling types to ensure that you're getting sort of quality open space environment in addition to that little bump in density. And then we've crafted dimensional standards that are really oriented toward that arterial condition where we're anticipated that the N1F will be mapped. We've got some alternative development options that we're building in for the N1 districts. The first of those is conservation development. This is available as an alternative to sort of a traditional site layout. So you might be able to get reduced setbacks, reduced lot size, kind of cluster the development in one portion of the site to really preserve or conserve site elements like open space or provide extra tree space. Just allows you a little bit of extra flexibility in terms of how you design your site in exchange for really the conservation of existing features. Then we also have what we're calling the mixed income bonus, which would allow for development of the standards of a district up in intensity from the district that you're operating with. And so say I've got a piece of property that's in the neighborhood 1B district. This would allow me to develop under the standards of the neighborhood 1C district. So it's a slight bump in intensity of what I can do. And in exchange for that, we're saying that 50% of the additional units that that bump will grant me must be set aside for households that are earning 70% of the AMI or the area median income. So it's really designed to kind of allow you a little bit of extra development intensity in exchange for really kind of a mixed income development. We also have some overlay districts that we've created. The first of those is the N1CCO, or the cottage court overlay. And this is designed to accommodate sort of that smaller, alternate, flexible orientation of structures on a lot. So what this one does is it reduces the total lot area that's required to 50% of the lot area for the underlying district. It allows you to be flexible in how you're designing the site, so you don't have to meet minimum lot sizes, lot widths, or setbacks, as well as the minimum building coverage of the underlying zoning district. But it has requirements that dwelling units within here must front on a public street or open space. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of you can do a different orientation of your units. You can slightly alter those lot sizes and those setbacks to create sort of a cottage court orientation to your development. The next one is the N1RIO, or the residential infill overlay. This one is really designed to facilitate sort of compatible infill within residential areas. And it's really focused sort of on the bulk of structures within these areas. So really maintaining and complementing existing neighborhood pattern and scale. It's focused on really building height and building size. There are specific controls that are in this one that even address height and the size of units based on calculations across a block face as well. So it's really focused on compatibility on the bulk of structures. And then we also have the neighborhood character overlay, the N1NCO, which is really to preserve character. So not so much necessarily 100% in terms of just size of structures, but this would allow you things like setbacks, building heights, minimum lot areas, minimum frontages, based on similar characteristics across a neighborhood. So there are eligibility requirements here that you would have to meet. There's an initiation process and there's an approval process that requires both the participation of the city as well as residents within an area to implement one of these neighborhood character improvements. So in addition to the neighborhood one, just kind of want to give you a glimpse of the larger palette. We haven't just been doing neighborhood one. We've also been looking at the whole series of mixed use and non-residential zoning districts as those sort of fit into the structure of the mixed use and non-residential place types. So to kind of work my way across really quickly here, from the manufacturing and logistics place type, you can see we've developed two separate ML districts to really reflect the variety of different types of development that you might see within a place site. In response to the innovation mixed use place type, we've come up with the IMU district, really focused on sort of that innovative mix of light industrial uses, creative uses, residential even in certain cases, when we're really focused on reuse of some existing character-driven buildings. We've got a series of campus districts to respond to the guidance within the campus place type. Those include 2 institutional campuses to really address sort of the more urban pattern versus suburban pattern that you often see in campus development, and then an office flex campus district as well. And then we move into the centers. For the place types, we've got the neighborhood center, the community activity center, the regional activity center. And so what you can see is we have a whole palette of districts in here to really engage those mixed use development concepts. So we've got the neighborhood center district, 2 community activity center districts, a regional activity center district, uptown edge and uptown core. And those all have different series of standards to really acknowledge on-the-ground development patterns as well as the vision within these place types. And then again, there on the bottom, you can see the TOD districts. That's kind of where they fit in to the general slate of districts here. And then finally, to wrap it up, the commercial districts. So these are, your more sort of traditional commercial areas within the city, not necessarily mixed use. You're not necessarily planning on mapping many more of these in the future, but you need to acknowledge what's there today. And that would be a general commercial district and a regional commercial district. So sort of larger single-purpose commercial developments. And then we have, again, the overlay and special purpose districts. So we already talked a little bit about the NCO district. We are also working on sort of cleanup of the historic district overlay. We're working on a manufactured home overlay to allow that type of development to happen in strategic areas of the city. Manufactured home park district to accommodate those where they occur. And then the airport noise disclosure overlay, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's really just a sort of a cleanup reorganization of the city's current airport overlay. So that was a lot, and it was a lot of detail, sort of taking a policy discussion and moving it down to nuts and bolts. But you can see that's, it's an exercise in what we're trying to do here and translate the policy into the actual regulatory structure. So we're happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think I do have a question. If we have other council members, is anyone else? Okay, bear with me one second. With regards to, so how did you, tell me the rationale between, with regards to saying duplexes, triplexes, single family in one category and quads in another?
Chris, I'll jump in on that one. That is actually something that we worked on with the comprehensive plan team and leadership. They're all allowed in those districts. The only difference is, and so we worked on that together, but that does come out of the comp plan. Sorry, to get back to that. Quads, the only difference is they are allowed on arterials with an affordable housing component, and that's the policy that is currently being proposed in the comp plan.
Okay, so a quad would be allowed in what looks like it would be, I don't know, is that N1A?
N1, yeah, and use current terms, that would be the kind of the new version of R3, R4, R5, R6, and R8. And that would be allowed on an arterial with one of the units being affordable.
Yeah, okay, but if it's not, if they just wanted to build a quad, where could that go?
That would have to be in one of the neighborhood 2 zoning districts. Wouldn't be accommodated in neighborhood 1.
Okay, so what happens when a triplex then, so who owns the land under a triplex? 3 people or 1 person?
It could be either one. It could be set up as an apartment owned by one. It could be condos, or it could be townhome on sublots.
Okay, so my question is, if you have a triplex with 1 owner, and then that person decides to build an ADU, now you've got a quadruplex, which should have been in a different category. Are you restricting that?
We are restricting ADUs, and I don't know, Chris, if you know that situation, but they're allowed with, I believe, single family and duplex, but Chris, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, as it's drafted, you're not permitted to have one with a triplex or a quadruplex.
Okay, that's what I wondered. And so with a duplex, if you have a duplex that has 2 owners, do they both get to build an ADU?
No. It would truly be whoever comes in first. And we've batted that back and forth, and we thought, well, do you allow it or not? But the only way if we allow it, it would be whoever comes in first on that master lot.
Yeah, and the conversation really revolved around, we didn't want to violate the basic principle that had been established, which is that sort of in the interior neighborhoods, you're getting those 3 units on a lot, and you'd have to be on an arterial to get those 4 units.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure, is that there's not a loophole created when you can then add on an ADU, and it also gets back to my whole driveway question. So I think that's the only question I had. Mr. Newton, I think you're the only one left on, and I'll just say for the public, we have a really tight day today because the rezoning meeting will start at 3 o'clock today because we had 10 cases left over. So council members are kind of scrambling to get everything done today and then be online at 3 o'clock. But I will also encourage the entire council to go back and watch this presentation in particular and the comp plan overview so that we know, we're really coming up to crunch time. So of course, anybody can go back and watch this on the Facebook page or YouTube page. So Mr. Newton, did you have any questions? Okay, that's it. So with that ends the presentations.
Motion to close.
Both of those. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. Half hour early. You guys get a half hour of your day back. So thank you, everybody.
Bye.